Zahara lived on the edge of town where people left offerings of fruit and quiet smiles at her gate. Everyone knew her by sight, a woman with calm eyes, hands that smelled faintly of herbs, and a laugh that caught like warm light. In a place quick to whisper, some called her a witch, others called her a miracle worker, but Zahara herself kept to her garden and her small rituals, neither defending nor boasting. Rumors grew like vines. When a neighbor's fever broke after Zahara laid cool palms on a hot forehead, tongues wagged and gossip fed itself until the story had wings. Children still chased her to sneak a touch of her wrist, while adults crossed the street to avoid the conversation. She moved through it with quiet dignity, reading the weather, tending plants, and listening to the city hum, an ordinary life wrapped in extraordinary accusations. Then one night a black car arrived at the edge of town and changed the rhythm of everything. The driver carried urgent papers and a mute urgency that made even the market hush. The name on the delivery whispered through the grapevine like a storm, Tariq. He was the most private man anyone knew, a figure of whispered power, and sooner than anyone expected, his gravest trouble would roll towards Zahara's doorstep. Tariq's wife, Amaya, had taken sick in a way doctors couldn't untangle, aches that mapped to memories, a breath that faltered like a candle in wind. Tariq was used to solutions, decisions, appointments, experts lined up with polished recommendations. This time the usual lines of help frayed. He found himself on the phone at midnight, voice soft, asking for something outside his usual universe, someone who listened differently. When his driver described Zahara, Tariq felt a strange tug, a hope he had never learned to name. He arrived with a guarded humility that surprised him. In his world people bent for him. Here, he bent toward something small and human. Zahara received them with a steady calm that felt like an answer before a question was asked. Her first visit to Tariq's home was quiet and honest. She sat with Amaya, held her hand, and told soft stories that had nothing to do with illness. Those stories seemed to unravel a tight knot in Amaya's chest, and as nights passed, small things changed. Laughter returned, sleep lengthened, the kind of tiny mercy that makes fear step back. The town watched in stunned silence as the billionaire's wife, once listed as fading, found a new horizon. News traveled faster than truth, and the town divided itself into camps of awe and suspicion. Some called Zahara a witch with reverence, as if magic were a compliment carved in stone. Others whispered that power that worked for the rich could not be pure. Tariq, protective and private, bristled at the murmurs against the woman who had stolen the darkness from his home and placed a steady hand on his family's fate. He wanted to shield her. But shielding meant exposing. Tariq's gratitude carried a dangerous beam of attention. Friends in his world circled with questions about motives, contracts, reputations, language Zahara did not know. She brushed off formalities and insisted on nothing, which made them more curious. In private, Tariq watched her walk through rooms like she belonged, and the gratitude in his chest softened into something more complex, respect turning to admiration. Amaya recovered in small, human increments, teeth brushing without dizziness, a morning where she could stand at the window and drink coffee without trembling. Each tiny victory felt like a bell shaping the next day. Drivers and aides who had once fortified Tariq's life with firm instructions now found themselves listening to stories of gardens and old remedies. The house became quieter for the wrong reasons. It loosened the edges of the life they thought they had built. The more Amaya smiled, the louder the world outside grew impatient and hungry for explanation. A talk show host with a grin that never left his face suggested Zahara be studied. An editorial called for clarity. The town's old superstitions and the city's pressing curiosity made a new kind of pressure, study versus sanctuary. Zahara, who kept her life simple, was suddenly pulled into a glare she had never wanted. Tariq refused the sensationalism at first. He made offers that were stumbling, awkward attempts to protect. Private rooms, signed letters, promises wrapped in the legal language he trusted. Zahara declined with a quiet firmness that unsettled him. She wanted no paid study, no crowded glass rooms where her hands would be prodded like art. Her refusal was not rejection of help but a boundary. Her work, she said, belonged to the intangible places between people. Public opinion split into hashtags, conversations, and late-night debates. Some praised Zahara as a healer beyond labels. Others labeled her a charlatan who had ensnared a billionaire's heart. Through it all, Amaya grew stronger in ways that mattered. Memory returning, colors reappearing, a music for mornings. Tariq watched his wife reclaim life and, in doing so, glimpsed a world he had never known he wanted to enter. one where kindness could be brave without being loud. A twist arrived when Zohora's past surfaced, not scandalous, just human. A cousin from far away remembered Zohora as a child who talked to elders and mended scraped knees. A teacher recalled her patience with books and birds. The image of Zohora as a wild, unknowable force softened. People began to say, slowly, that maybe the word which had been less a truth and more a story told by fear. Yet the label had momentum. Labels are stubborn creatures. Tariq found himself defending Zohora in places he never defended anything. At meetings, over dinners, in terse conversations where his authority usually swayed. He did it not for credit but because watching someone he cared about be misread made him ache. It surprised him how personal the ache became. When he spoke her name at a dinner table full of polished cynicism, some eyes slid away and others watched to see if he would falter. He did not. Amaya, who had been given back small privileges, walking without help, remembering a poem, sitting in sunlight, began to make requests that changed the household rhythm. She asked Zohora to stay longer, to teach her the quiet recipes for rest. Those hours stitched a new bond, not of service but of friendship. The world outside continued to talk, but inside the house a simpler truth took root. Two women, one rich in resources, one rich in humility, learning the contours of each other's lives. Jealousy found a way into shadows, not the kind tied to wealth but the brittle envy that comes when someone else is given what you cannot buy: time, attention, healing. A few who had once relied on influence felt exposed by Zohora's unassuming power. Old alliances shifted. Tariq's circle, used to operating in the language of favors, found Zohora's refusal of gifts disorienting. They expected her to be pliable, she was not. That refusal became a quiet rebellion. Rumors took strange shapes. Someone proposed that Zohora's healing came from secret ingredients or from access to hidden knowledge. Others whispered that Amaya had staged the recovery to teach Tariq a lesson. Tariq heard it all and felt the old muscles clench: control, cleanup, retaliation. Instead he surprised himself by choosing a different path. He set small boundaries, letting the noise be noise and focusing on what mattered inside the home. The gesture was subtle, powerful, a refusal to weaponize suspicion. Inside Zohora's kitchen, over cups of bitter tea, Amaya learned to breathe without apology. Zohora taught her to tend one plant at a time, to notice the way light falls in the afternoon, to count steps without expectation. Each lesson was gentle, an education in living that no money could buy. Days smoothed into a rhythm that felt like healing itself, small, steady, and human. The town's mayor-like figure, someone people deferred to out of habit, called for a gathering under the old banyan, hoping to harness public curiosity. He wanted an answer to the single question everyone wanted asked: how did she do it? Zohora arrived, not to perform, but to listen. She sat on a wooden stool and let voices rise and fall, each story a map of longing and fear. People approached with skepticism and with gratitude, and some clutched photographs of sick children and broken marriages as though healing could be a simple formula. Rather than thunderous declarations, Zohora spoke plainly about attention and kindness. She said the human body remembers comfort, it remembers being seen. She told stories of small acts, holding a hand through the night, bringing water when someone cannot stand, and how those acts invite the body to surrender a little of its fear. The words were not mystical, they were humble and radical in their simplicity. The crowd listened, and some began to understand that what had been called witchcraft was often compassion given without cost. A child in the back asked if Zohora could mend his grandfather's constant cough. Zohora nodded, not promising miracles but presence. She bent down and set a warm cloth across the boy's brow. That moment, small and intimate, became a bell for the town. People left differently, some bewildered, some hopeful, and a few newly brave enough to apologize to neighbors they had wronged. The label lingered for some, but its edges softened like ink in rain. Tariq's world tried to adapt. Boardrooms that once revolved around profit margins now included the inconvenient human question: what is the cost of being well? Investors and aides whispered about public image and philanthropic messaging. Tariq said none of those things mattered as much as his wife's laugh at breakfast. He began to notice that his past life, a series of careful calculations, had left him with a loneliness he had not named. Zohora's steady presence exposed it like sunlight through shutters. He surprised himself by asking Zohora to walk with him in the sprawling garden one evening, not as a protector or employer but as a man wanting to know what made her laugh. They spoke of small things, the taste of unripe mango, the sound of rain on tin. Tariq confessed his fear of being unmoored by a life he had built around certainty. Zahara listened without judgment and said that bravery sometimes looks like staying when it would be easier to leave. Her words settled inside him like seeds. That fall, publicists learned to stop trying to sculpt Zahara into a headline. They realized that no headline could capture the quiet of afternoons where two people traded stories and sat with the silence between words. Tariq found himself drawn not to power but to the domestic miracles of ordinary days. Critics would call it sentiment. Tariq called it the only thing that felt true. In private, he thanked Zahara in ways he had never thanked anyone, an honest gratitude that felt like a small miracle on its own. As Amaya's health brightened, new tensions surfaced in unexpected corners. Old friends who had relied on Tariq's attention felt left out and misread his quiet changes as betrayal. They whispered that Zahara had shifted the furniture of his heart. Tariq's work-life balance teetered, not because of business demands but because people expected him to remain the man he had always been, unflinching and unemotional. His growth unsettled them. Zahara watched those tensions with a calm curiosity. She had no appetite for power or spectacle, and she warned against letting gratitude calcify into ownership. She reminded Tariq that caring for someone did not mean controlling them. Those conversations laid bare the heart of the matter. Healing was not a transaction but a change in how people lived together. Some friends took the lesson kindly, others drifted away like leaves on a stream. Tariq felt a pang and learned the hard lesson that growth sometimes asks you to let go of comfortable alliances. Amaya, finally free of the nights that once kept her awake, began to say things out loud, small admissions of longing, a wish to go back to school for a subject she loved, a desire to plant more orchids. Zahara encouraged her in practical ways, steering her toward teachers and small routines. Their friendship deepened into a sisterhood born of shared mornings and honest conversations. It was a quiet reclaiming of life, and each reclaimed piece felt like a victory against the shadow that had nearly swallowed Amaya. A journalist with a sincere heart and a notebook full of questions came to the house, seeking truth beyond the spectacle. She found Zahara making tea and Amaya humming as she shelled peas. The piece she wrote refused the simple binary of witch or fraud. Instead it told a story of human hands and listening hearts. Readers responded not with frenzy but with a subtle shift in the way they noticed kindness in one another. The article made headlines for its restraint, and people began to ask different questions. The aftermath of that essay rippled gently. Neighbors reached out with casseroles, a teacher invited Zahara to speak about simple herbal remedies, and a man Zahara had once helped in silence came to thank her with a poem. The kind of attention Zahara tolerated now felt careful rather than hungry. Tariq breathed easier. Amaya grew happier by subtle degrees. The town, which had been a theater for suspicion, started to feel like a quilt where patches of tenderness had been stitched together. Not everyone turned gentle. A small group still wanted proof in lab reports and televised demonstrations. Zahara declined, explaining that the heart of her work was not suitable for a microscope. Tariq supported her, citing the privacy he cherished. The debate continued in certain circles, but its heat had cooled. Even those who demanded certainty began, in private, to admit that the small kindnesses of daily life mattered in ways they had once dismissed. A younger woman named Layla came to Zahara, carrying the weight of a recent loss and a question about who she would become. Layla had heard whispers and read articles. She came not for spectacle but because she saw in Zahara a model of strength. Zahara received her with the same steady hands that had helped Amaya, and their sessions were plain and human, shared meals, long walks, and exercises in remembering small pleasures. Layla's recovery was slow but real, marked by reclaimed laughter and a new way of standing. Tariq watched these quiet transformations with a humility that surprised him. He no longer jumped to fix everything. He learned to sit beside people in discomfort, to offer coffee and stability instead of solutions. His world, once defined by transactions and tidy answers, grew more patient. He found himself learning from Zahara the value of presence, and that lesson changed the way he led in small ways that mattered, how he listened in meetings, how he checked in with people who worked for him, how he let empathy shape decisions. The town continued to reconcile its image of Zahara with the woman who mended lives with patience. A small group of skeptics softened when they saw Layla return to the market with a brightness in her step. The discourse shifted from what Zahara did to what she taught. Listen deeply, give time, and let people be seen. Those little rules spread like good gossip, and the community's tempo shifted toward gentleness. A storm blew through one afternoon, not of violence but of sudden change. Tariq received news that required him to choose between attending a crucial meeting or staying home where Amaya was celebrating a simple victory. Old instincts nudged him toward obligation, new instincts held him at the doorway. He stepped into the room and stayed. The choice rippled through his life, a quiet recalibration of priorities that startled his board and warmed his wife. Zahara watched that decision like someone watching a sunflower turn toward light. The storm pushed family members and friends to examine their own weather. Some admitted to mistakes, others made small amends. Zahara's influence had become a mirror, reflecting not only cures but the shape of a good life. People began to value small acts, making soup for a neighbor, answering a late-night call, sharing silence. Those acts made the town feel less brittle and more humane. Tariq and Amaya found in those small changes a life rebuilt on different foundations, gentler, truer, less concerned with appearances. At night after the storm, Zahara walked the garden paths alone and felt no bitterness toward those who once called her names. The whispers had cost her in small ways, but they had also taught the town to look inward. She had become a fulcrum for change without ever seeking the role, and she slept knowing that the world had shifted slightly toward tenderness. The storm left the air clean and the stars sharp, and Zahara's heart settled like a boat back in a familiar cove. Word of Zahara's work spread beyond the usual channels, carried by people who had been helped and by those who had simply seen something true. Invitations arrived not as demands but as requests. Could she teach a small circle how to sit with grief? Could she read to a group of elders who had lost songs? Zahara accepted only what fit easily with her life. She refused spectacle and resisted turning kindness into currency. Her choices made people respect her boundaries. One evening, Tariq and Zahara spoke about a future neither had planned. He admitted that his life had been built on an idea of success that now felt empty. Zahara confessed she had never wanted to change the world, only to offer what she could to the people around her. Their confessions were not dramatic but honest, and in that honesty they found a tender companionship. They were different in upbringing and habit, but their values, care, humility, integrity, aligned in ways that mattered more than either expected. Amaya watched them with a smile that was both mischievous and grateful. She had regained not only her health but also a voice she had thought lost. She teased Tariq for his newfound attentiveness and thanked Zahara with meals and flowers and long afternoons of shared stories. The house settled into a gentle rhythm that suited them, quiet mornings, busy afternoons, generous evenings. Life felt possible again, and hope had returned as an everyday companion. A complication arrived not from malice but from misunderstanding. A television producer wanted to air a special about Zahara's methods. Tariq refused on principle, but Amaya, curious about the wider good, hesitated. She saw potential for more people to learn the small practices that had helped her, but Zahara feared spectacle would strip those practices of intimacy. The three of them argued like family, earnest, messy, and full of care, and reached a compromise that honored privacy while sharing useful knowledge in a modest way. They agreed to create a series of intimate conversations, recorded not for ratings but for those who genuinely wanted guidance. The project focused on listening, presence, and practical comfort, how to make a resting place for someone who is ill, how to hold a hand without words, how to make a quiet meal. It was not about magic, it was about human crafts of care. When the first episode aired quietly online, viewers wrote messages about how the advice helped them comfort parents and neighbors. The response was simple and human, exactly what Zahara had hoped for. Tariq felt relief and surprise at how meaningful restraint could be. Amaya reveled in teaching small things she had once feared lost. Zahara remained the same at heart, uninterested in the spotlight and deeply committed to the work of being present. The project's modest success spread gentle ripples, not waves, and the town found itself less prone to extremes of belief and more willing to try practical kindness. Life's twists sometimes arrive as delicate tests. Layla, who had rebuilt her life with Zahara's quiet mentorship, faced a new challenge that stirred old fears. Zahara guided her through nights of doubt, showing her how to anchor herself in small rituals, morning stretches, writing 2 lines of gratitude, tending 1 plant. Those rituals multiplied into a steady light that kept Layla afloat. The victory was not dramatic but profound. Layla learned to live with complexity instead of fleeing from it. Tariq watched this and realized how healing multiplied when shared. He began hosting small gatherings where people could swap stories without expectation of grandeur. They were not philanthropic events in the grand sense. just circles of neighbors, workers, friends, and strangers who ate together and listened. The gatherings felt like a balm to the town's old wounds, and Zahara participated without fanfare, offering tea and the occasional homely proverb. The circles grew not because someone demanded it but because people wanted a place to be seen. This quiet movement shifted conversations about success and influence in ways that surprised even the skeptics. People began to praise small courage, calling a mother to check in, admitting vulnerability to a friend, saying "I'm sorry." The town's tempo slowed in certain places, and the change felt sustainable because it grew from daily practice rather than grand pronouncements. A rival healer from another part of the region arrived with a different approach, flashy, theatrical, and hungry for applause. The newcomers' demonstrations drew crowds who loved spectacle, and for a while the drama drowned out Zahara's soft work. Yet the crowd soon discovered what Zahara had always known: spectacle thrills but does not always mend. People returned to Zahara seeking the slow, honest work that restored bones of routine and heart. Tariq observed this with an odd mix of amusement and relief. He had expected rivalry to breed conflict, but instead it clarified what the community needed: not grand cures but steady companionship. Zahara handled the uproar with a calm that made the rivals' antics seem hollow. Her presence, steady as a lighthouse, called people back to the shore when their boats rocked too wildly. The lesson was plain: authenticity outlasts thunder. Amaya, now fully herself again, thrived in this new season. She wrote notes to neighbors, learned a new hobby that delighted her, and told stories that made people cry and laugh in equal measure. Her recovery had been neither sudden nor spectacular, it had been patient and human. Watching her reclaim life, those around her celebrated not only health but the return of a spirit that touched everyone who knew her. A proposal arrived for Zahara to travel and teach, to bring her methods to people who could not reach her easily. She hesitated. Travel meant more attention, attention risked misinterpretation. Tariq urged caution but also encouraged her to follow what felt right. After nights of thinking and talking, Zahara chose to say yes, but on her terms: small groups, intimate settings, and a promise that nothing would be sensationalized. The choice opened a new chapter in her work without betraying what she cherished. She traveled with a quiet entourage, Amaya sometimes, Tariq at other times, but mostly she walked rooms with people who needed practical comfort. The sessions were raw and unvarnished. People shared grief and learned how to hold it together with small acts. Zahara's teaching spread not by headlines but by returned energy, families who learned how to be present for one another. The ripple effect was subtle and steady, exactly the kind of change Zahara believed in. Back home, the town adapted to her absence by practicing the habits she taught. Neighbors checked in on one another, small complaints were met with kindness, and the rhythm of everyday care became a little stronger. Zahara returned to this softened ground each time, grateful and surprised by how much could change when ordinary people paid attention to each other. A revelation shifted everything in quiet, personal ways. Zahara confided to Amaya and Tariq a childhood memory, a grandmother who taught her that listening could be a medicine. She'd learned then that people often heal when they are given space to tell their stories. The revelation did not make Zahara mystical, it made her a keeper of a simple lineage of care. This honesty made people love her all the more. Tariq, who had once measured life by ledger and outcome, felt his metrics rearrange. He began to invest his time in people rather than projects, sitting with someone through a bad night, picking up a friend who needed company, opening his home without ceremony. The change did not erase his business acumen, but it tempered it with empathy. His friends noticed and, slowly, some adopted his softer rhythms. The world of deals kept spinning, but Tariq's corner had new priorities. Amaya, who had reclaimed so many small pleasures, suggested they celebrate the lives saved not with a gala but with a community picnic. Zahara hesitated, she disliked spectacle, but agreed to a modest gathering. It turned into a day of quiet songs and shared food, where the town's true heart showed up, ordinary people, joyful and grateful. No speeches, no headlines, just human presence, which, to Zahara, was the truest kind of healing. As the years moved, Zahara's name lost its sharp edges. People who once called her which now invited her to family happenings, and the label that had once stung felt distant like an outdated rumor. Her work became part of the town's rhythm, not mandatory but treasured. She continued to refuse fame, choosing the steady satisfaction of minutes spent mending a neighbor's anxious night. Those minutes multiplied into a life of deep, quiet significance. Tariq and Amaya grew into a life that surprised them both. They kept their wealth but used it differently, not to be seen, but to create stable spaces for people to meet and listen. They were careful, intentional, and private. Their home became a place where people found respite, where losses were acknowledged and small comforts were given freely. The couple's transformation was ordinary and beautiful, and people admired them not for grand gestures but for their slow, consistent care. Zahora, now older and still sharp-eyed, walked through the town and recognized faces she had helped shape back toward life. She felt gratitude and an unpressured pride. Her story had been misread and then slowly understood, and the final truth seemed gentle. People heal when they are seen, held, and given time. She had never called her work magic, she called it human work, and that name fit just fine. In the final chapter of this season, a festival of lights, small lanterns tied to trees and windows, appeared across the town, not to herald a miracle but to celebrate ongoing care. Zahora stood beneath the awning of her garden watching the light wobble and settle, and she felt a deep peace she had not expected. Tariq and Amaya joined her, hands linked, no fanfare, just three people who had navigated fear and gratitude and come out on the other side with gentleness intact. They talked quietly about what mattered, the courage to be kind, the bravery of showing up, and the modest miracles that come from day-to-day attention. Zahora smiled and reminded them that healing is not a destination but a practice. The town had learned that lesson slowly, now it breathed easier because of it. Children played in the street, elders nodded in recognition, and neighbors exchanged recipes for tea and rest. When the lanterns burned low and the night settled soft, Zahara walked home feeling the steady weight of a life well lived. No labels could contain the quiet truth she embodied. Compassion, practiced in ordinary ways, changes everything. People would remember the story of the woman they once called a witch and, when they told it, they would speak not of spectacle but of small hands held, of laughter returning, and of a billionaire's wife who learned to live again. The town had been stunned once, then it had learned to be tender, and that was the sweetest ending of all.